Okay, so imagine this. You're trapped in a room with a bunch of strangers. You're all grieving, but then someone starts telling you there's a right way to do it. That's the kind of psychological pressure cooker we're diving into today with Luigi Pirandello's short story, War. It's an incredible story from 1918 that really makes you question how we're supposed to feel when we're faced with a huge loss.
So, the entire story happens right here, in this cramped, smoky, second-class train car in Italy during World War I. But this isn't just a setting, it's basically a trap. You've got all these strangers packed in together overnight, and that tight, uncomfortable space, well, it just forces everyone's grief and anxiety right out into the open. There's literally nowhere to hide.
And right into the middle of this super tense situation, we meet our main character, a woman who is so deep in her mourning that she's hiding her face from everybody. Her sadness is just this silent, heavy weight in the train car. See, she's just found out her only son is being sent to the front lines, and her pain, it's the spark that sets this whole thing off.
Yeah, so her grief doesn't stay private for very long. The other passengers, who are all dealing with their own wartime fears, they just can't let her be. Instead, they start to make a case for the, quote, correct way to feel, putting on this patriotic mask to cover up their own raw personal pain.
The first challenge to her silent grief comes when her husband tries to explain their situation. He says, look, it is our only son. But the group, they immediately shut him down with this cold, hard logic. They say parental love isn't like a loaf of bread, you can't divide it up. So losing one son is just as bad as losing two. Right from the get-go, it's pure emotion versus this intellectual argument. And then he joins the conversation. This big, red-faced man who becomes the loud, confident voice for patriotic duty. His argument is pretty simple and honestly kind of brutal. Personal grief is selfish. He says a son dying for his country is a moment for pride, not for tears. And he says all of this with this totally convincing mask of being in complete control. He kicks off his whole speech with this really sharp, challenging question. He's not even just talking about the war anymore. He's going after the very foundation of being a parent. He's basically asking everyone, who do your kids really belong to?
And here's his answer. He argues that once your children are grown, they don't belong to you anymore. They belong to the nation. This idea completely reframes the whole sacrifice of war. It's not a personal loss, he's suggesting. It's a national contribution. And then he takes his argument to its most shocking point. He says the right way to react when your son dies for his country isn't with tears, but with laughter and pride. He even claims that he's laughing. But, and this is a huge clue, the story tells us his lips are trembling and his eyes are watery. Something's not right here.
All right, so the battle lines have been drawn. Inside this tiny train car, we have two completely opposite ways of looking at loss, and they are about to collide. Let's break it down.
What this all really boils down to is a massive split. On one side, you've got the mother's grief, which is super personal, emotional, and makes her feel totally alone. And on the other side, you've got the bulky man's argument, which is all about being public, logical, and uniting people under this banner of patriotic duty. I mean, they're speaking two completely different languages.
And the crazy part is, the man's speech actually works. The grieving mother, who's been feeling so isolated, she listens to this powerful argument and sees everyone else in the carriage nodding along. And for the very first time, she starts to doubt her own feelings. She thinks, wait a minute, maybe I'm the one who's been grieving all wrong.
And that moment of doubt, that little shift in how she sees things, well, that leads us directly to the story's climax. And it all comes down to one single, simple question. So while everyone is congratulating the bulky man on how brave and stoic he is, the woman, almost like she's waking up from a trance, she just leans forward. And that's it. That's the question. It's not some big argument or a deep philosophy. It's just a simple, direct, and devastatingly human question that cuts right through all that patriotic noise.
And with that one question, the entire facade that this man has built for himself, and really for everyone else in that carriage, it all comes crashing down.
You can almost see it like a chain reaction, right? The man gives his powerful, logical speech. It gets hit with a simple, emotional question, and that one question triggers this sudden, shocking realization, the raw truth that he had been pushing down the whole time.
The story describes his physical reaction in this really brutal detail. His face twists up. He just stares at her because her question completely bypassed his brain and just hit him right in the heart. In that one moment, the idea of his son's death becomes the crushing reality of it. Forever.
And then The mask doesn't just crack, it totally shatters. The man who just gave a lecture on laughing at death, he breaks down into these uncontrollable sobs. The raw, undeniable truth of his grief just erupts, and it shocks everyone who was just praising him for being so strong.
So what's the big takeaway here? Pirandello is showing us that grief is this primal, powerful force that you just can't bottle up with logic or a sense of duty. He shows how pressures from society, like patriotism, can become these walls we build to hide our own pain. But maybe the most powerful lesson is that a single, simple moment of truth can bring those walls down completely. And that leaves us with this question, doesn't it? The bulky man, he thought he was being strong by suppressing his pain. But was that actually strength? Or was it just denial? Pirandello's story really forces us to look at our own lives and ask, where do we draw the line between being resilient and just hiding from reality? It's a question that was powerful 100 years ago, and it's just as relevant for all of us today.